ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम्। या देवी सर्वभूतेषु शक्तिरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः। So Hari Om and salutations to one and all. We had seen last time that Ramakrishna Paramhamsa, how he was initiated into the path of non-dualism, Advait Vedant, by the great master Totapuri, and how Totapuri Maharaj got initiated into the worship of Mother Kali as a form. Then we saw Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, also followed various other religions as well as sects, and final experience in each one was the same for him. Now we come to that part where it is said, in 1868, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa went on a pilgrimage with Mathur Babu and some 125 people to the North India, to different places in the north. So Varanasi and such places they went. So when they went to Baidyanath, which is one of the Jyotirlings of Lord Shiva, it's in Bihar, there he saw that the whole village was very poor and the people did not even have bare essentials there, and there were a lot of people who were having no food, they were starving. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa immediately told Mathur Babu that please feed all of them and give them some clothes. Mathur Babu hesitated because it's an additional expense. So Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he sat down there. He said, I will not go to Banaras, I will not go to Kashi. He went, he said, I am going to stay here with them. You go. You want to worship Bhagwan in Kashi, you go. For me, all these are manifestations of Bhagwan himself. So that way finally Mathur Babu gave in, and then he distributed some food and some clothes and everything. Similarly, he did that another place which was the like a tea garden. Not a tea garden, sorry. It was the this was 2 years after that. So 1870, in Mathur Babu's estate, he had given, he has leased the estate to various people, and they are supposed to cultivate the crops, sell it, and then pay him some amount. But there were no rains for 2 years, and so these people were not able to pay. And when Mathur Babu had taken Ramakrishna Paramahamsa to that place, Ramakrishna came to know this, and he said, when there is no rains, they are helpless. What will they do? And why are you charging them? And why is it that you are making it like a thing that they have to repay when the rains come? You have to write it off and let them. It's not their fault. Mathur Babu declined. He said, I will not do that. So Ramakrishna said something very powerful. He said, you are only the steward of the Divine Mother, and they are the tenants of the mother. You must spend the mother's money. When they are suffering, how can you refuse to help them? You must help them. So when we say that Jan Seva, Janardhan Seva, Manav Seva is Madhav Seva. Here we find Ramakrishna Paramhamsa is actually perceiving that in all of them. For him, it's not an information, or for him, it is not just some bhav he is having. He is experiencing that the Lord alone has become all this. So, continuing coming back to that pilgrimage that they went, when they went to Kashi, to Banaras, it is said that Ramakrishna literally saw what the Shastra has said. Please remember, he has not read the Shastras, he is not very educated in that sense. But he goes to Kashi and he literally sees there that on the Manikarnika Ghat, where the bodies are being burned, his experience is that Lord Shiva is initiating the Jiva into the Mahamantra Ram personally. And then the Divine Mother ensures that the Jiva goes ahead in the journey of their evolution. Which is why the Hindus, many of us, we believe that in Kashi, when one dies, one gets mukti. Because Shivji initiates the Jiva into the Tarak Mantra Ram. And this Ramakrishna Paramahamsa himself saw directly through his purity of his mind and his vision that people got this kind of a mukti. They went to Vrindavan, they went to Mathura. And when he went there, it is said that his heart was filled with devotion. Remember, he has done this sadhanas earlier. He has worshipped Radhakant ji. He has understood about the bhav of the gopis. He himself had come into gopi bhav sometimes. So when he went there, he was filled with a lot of bhavna for the Supreme Lord. And he wept there. He said, "Oh Krishna, everything here is as it is in the olden days. But you are not there in the flesh and blood." Meaning you are not there as an avatar. Otherwise, everything is divine. But as an avatar, you are not there. Ramakrishna, Mathur Babu also wanted them to go to Gaya. But Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, "I will not go to Gaya." Because if you remember, he was born by the blessings of Lord Vishnu. Because his father had taken a pilgrimage to Gaya. And through that blessings of the Supreme Lord, that's why Ramakrishna was named earlier as Gadadhar. So he went, he did not go to Gaya because he said, if I go there, he said that he will never come back from there. He will get absorbed in the Lord there only and he may drop the body also. So he said, no, I am not going to go to Gaya. So they all returned. So 2 years later, there was a pilgrimage done to this place called Nadia, which is the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they have to go there by boat. So as the boat reached the shores there, again Ramakrishna has this vision. He sees Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his brother Nityananda, both of them as though they are chanting the name of the Lord, and they have come to, maybe Ramakrishna's bhav was that, they are coming towards him, and finally Ramakrishna saw that they merged in him. Both of them, they merged in him as though. These are his mystic visions. So these are some of the pilgrimages that he took up. In our culture, pilgrimage has a lot of significance because for us, these are not just places or, there is not just some idol there. The divine Lord is invoked there, manifests there. And for us, the temple is an embodiment of the entire spiritual vibration itself. The Supreme Lord himself is there. So the Murti is not just a form or an idol. And these Tirtha Yatras, when one does, one takes some sankalpa, one ensures that one lives in tapasya, one does the remembrance of the Lord, one meets the sadhus, mahatmas. Like when Ramakrishna went there to Kashi, he met the Trailanga Swami. Trailanga Swami is a great master who is supposed to have lived for 200 years. And deep sadhanas he used to do. He was very huge in his size and in his weight also. But a person established in the absolute truth, served the masses quite a bit. People many times would not know such miracles also he has done. So Ramakrishna had met Trailanga Swami there. Then when he had gone to Vrindavan, he had met this woman saint Ganga Mai. Ganga Mai was considered as the incarnation of Radhaji herself. So like that, so pilgrimage is a great sadhana to do, to meet the sadhus, mahatmas, to do tapasya, and to have darshan of Bhagwan himself there. So Ramakrishna had done all this. Now the point to understand here is this, that he is somebody who has already had the darshan of Mother Kali, Bhagwan Krishna, Bhagwan Ram, plus the experience of non-dual self, and yet he does all the pilgrimages. He need not do. For us, we need to do to purify our mind, for ensuring that we are able to invoke more and more grace of the Lord and ultimately realize our oneness with the Lord. For him, it is an expression of love itself, that he is seeing the divine in different forms in these different places with their glorious manifestations. And second is a learning for all of us, that if such an accomplished master also takes up these pilgrimages as a sadhana, then we should also do, because we have still not even reached the goal. Now, some portion of his life, some aspects of how was his relationship with Sharda Devi. Now, we had seen that Sharda Devi, when she was 5 years old only, that time she was married to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, but she continued to live with her parents. Now she has become 18 years old, and now she comes to Dakshineshwar. Earlier she was in her village, Jairambati. And when Ramakrishna had come to Kamarpukur, his house, to meet his mother and stay with her for some time, she had visited him and went back to her village. Now she is 18 years old. So in 1872, Sharda Devi comes to Dakshineshwar. And she had come all the way walking. And she was also not well. She was sick. So when she arrived at the temple garden and Ramakrishna Paramahamsa saw her, he said, "Oh, you have come too late. My Mathur is no longer here to take care of you." Because Mathur Babu had passed away just the previous year, 1871, he had passed away. So the master himself took up the task. So he started taking care of her, giving her instructions in everything, because she has come from a small village now into this town, into Dakshineshwar. So right from housekeeping to the knowledge of Brahman, in every aspect, Ramakrishna had instructed her, given her, started, training her how to trim a lamp, how to behave towards people according to their different temperaments, how to conduct herself before visitors. And of course, in spiritual life, so how to do sadhana, how to do japa, prayer, meditation, and what is samadhi. All these things, he initiated her into that. And the first lesson he taught her in spiritual life is very beautiful. He says that first thing he taught was, God is everybody's beloved, just as the moon is dear to every child. And everyone has a right to pray to him. And you will also see him if you just pray to him with that heart of a child. So that way, he instructed her in both the way of the world as well as in the spiritual aspects. Totapuri Maharaj had told him, when he came to know that he was married, because remember he was given sannyas, Totapuri Maharaj told him that unless you drop this idea of the body identification, you can't uh, experience the absolute heights of Vedanta. So that time he had told him that, but I am married, I have a wife, I am a grihasthi. At that time, Totapuri Maharaj had told him that what does it matter? He alone is established in the knowledge of Brahman, who goes beyond the idea of man and woman, meaning beyond body identification. And so he said to Ramakrishna that a person who has the body identification can be a good aspirant but cannot realize Brahman. So one has to drop the idea, whether one is a grihasthi or a sannyasi or a brahmachari or a vanaprasthi, doesn't matter. To realize the supreme, the absolute truth, drop the idea that I am the body. This is one beautiful point you will see in our all the scriptures, Puranas, etc. Sannyas has its own glory, but the state of realization is not limited to only sannyasis. The state of realization is for everybody at any stage of life. So it is not that only at the end of life, when one has become a sannyasi in the last stage of 25 years, then one will realize. At any stage, one can realize. It's not that grihasthis will not realize and only sannyasis will realize. Those barriers are not there. Each stage has its own importance, but being in any stage, if somebody is able to go beyond body identification, that person will realize the absolute. And through the sadhana process, Ramakrishna had already done that. And so it is that though they were a couple, they were husband and wife, their relationship was like a guru and a disciple. And it is said that one day Ramakrishna also arranged for a very special worship of the Devi. And something unique that he did was, he did not keep the murti or the picture of the Devi. He made Sharda Devi sit there. And he worshipped her as the appearance of Mother Kali herself. So that was his purity and that was his bhav. So their relationship is very interesting. On one hand, Ramakrishna is the guru, she has been learning a lot from him. On the other hand, he looks upon her as Mother Kali herself, which is very beautiful, because from the standpoint of the disciple who has not yet realized, there is a guru and there is a shishya bhav, and the shishya surrenders to the guru. But from the standpoint of the guru, everything is divine. That's why the person is the guru. So the guru doesn't think of shishya as one who has not realized. The guru sees same Brahman in all. And that's why in Shankaracharyaji's Nirvana Shatkam it comes. Na bandhur na mitram gurur naiva shishyaha chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. No bandhu, no mitra, no guru and no shishya also. That is the highest state of oneness, which Ramakrishna had experienced, and also now he is seeing everyone as the appearances of the divine. So he worshipped Sharda Devi herself. Now also we should remember this one fact, that this is at a time when the society was still very conservative. It was not that it was so easy. So there would be people who would say he's a madman, what is he doing and all that. But Ramakrishna didn't bother about those things. So this relationship of theirs, because they were married, Ramakrishna set that example that how a grihasthi also can realize the absolute truth. So it is not that a person who marries cannot realize. At the same time, living in complete abidance with knowledge, with dispassion, with devotion to the Divine Mother, he also proves that sadhana of this type can lead to the supreme. So he lived like a sannyasi while being a grahasti. That's the combination that he had. Now, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, though he has attained that state of absolute truth, when someone knows about Brahman, he is called as a jnani. But through the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, etc., when a person has come to experience that divine absolute truth, non-dual truth, that person is called as a Vijnani. So Ramakrishna had become a Vijnani. And the word Paramhamsa means that. Literal translation somebody does, then they will say the supreme swan. Hamsa means a swan. The swan is a bird which can separate milk from water. If milk and water are mixed up, it will drink away the milk or water will remain. Meaning it is a symbol of subtle discrimination. And that discrimination, whoever has that subtle intellect can do about the body and the world, that I am not the body, I am infinite consciousness. And this world is not real, it is illusory. That discrimination one who can do and ultimately abide in the self which is appearing as this world and this individual. That person is called Paramhamsa. So Ramakrishna had attained that state of Paramhamsa. And yet we know that the mother had told him that remain in the sixth chakra so that you can go into the absolute when required and also transact in the world. So the ego which is maintained, that ego is called Badhita Ahankar. It is a falsified ego. So Ramakrishna operated in three states in that ego: as a servant, as a child, and as a devotee. He would shift into these three egos whenever required. Now, what is the meaning of a falsified ego? Just like an actor while playing a role, deep down very clearly knows this is not me at all and this whole movie also is not real. In the same way, this person plays the role. So Ramakrishna may play the role of a teacher, of a priest, of a husband, of a friend. Those things he may play the role, but he knows that all of these are false. So the example given in Vedanta for that is the rope. The rope is generally used to tie certain things. Suppose that rope is coiled and kept. Now, if we want to tie something, we can take the rope and tie it up. So that rope has a utility value. But suppose when the rope is coiled, you set that rope on fire, that rope will remain, it will look coiled only. It will retain the shape and everything. But if you try to pick it up, it's only all ashes or powder. It will not have any utility value. So it is like that. The ego of the master is really not existing, but it's an appearance of the ego. That's why it is called falsified ego. So they may go through various experiences, but they know none of them are real. So that is what the Badhita Ahankar it is. And so that is what the master used to be in while he is out of that state of samadhi, transacting in the world. One day it is said that Sharda Devi was pressing his feet and she asked him that, what do you think of me? And quickly the master's response was just instantaneous. And he said, the mother who is worshipped in the temple is the mother who has given birth to my body, is now living in the Nahabat, and it is she again who is stroking my feet at this moment. Indeed, I always look on you as the personification of the blissful mother Kali. This is his bhav. So this is the devotee bhav. Sometimes he will get into the bhav as that I am a servant of the divine. Sometimes he will get into the bhav of a small child, mother who is the child who is praying to the divine as the mother. So these different bhavs, he comes and he goes into these states. But all the while, inside he knows that there is only one truth, and that truth alone is appearing as all this. So the most humblest person ever would be a realized person. Because the realized person knows that there is only one truth, and the experience of that person is there is only one truth. Everything else is appearance of that. So the ego that we have for power, for position, for wealth, for youth, for popularity, that ego that we have for all these is not there in the master, because one sees all as appearances of the Supreme. So in this way, the relationship of Ramakrishna with Sharda Devi was beautiful, and she had many spiritual experiences with his guidance. And hence we find that many people, many of the monks later on after Ramakrishna took Samadhi, many monks were guided by Sharda Devi also. Now, this brings us to the conclusion of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa's spiritual sadhana phase of his life. And if we have to quickly just summarize what are some of his main conclusions, they are first and foremost that he realized that everything is divine. Second, his experience was that I am a free soul, unbound, and same is with everyone. Each one of us are the free souls. Soul is infinite, soul can never be bound. It is just that false identification with the body, so we think we are bound and we are these limited entities. So various disciplines he practiced brought him to the same experience. Third, he also saw that all different religions and different paths are true. Fourth, he literally saw everyone as appearances of the divine. So the seva bhav that he had was again very genuine, born out of genuine compassion and love. Then all the schools of philosophy of Vedanta, so Dvaita Vedanta, dualism, Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism, and Vishishtadvaita, qualified monism, all the three are only stages in the evolution of a person. They are not mutually contradictory, but depending on different temperaments of different people, each may follow a certain path. And through that path itself, one can realize the absolute, or from one step, from Dvaita to Vishishtadvaita to Advaita, one can go in progression also. So these are all his experiences. And he also had seen that there is some divine role that the mother has for him to share the spiritual knowledge in this whole world. So he knew that there are some disciples who have to come, and then through them this knowledge will go to the various parts of the world. And it is also said that he had foreseen his time of death also, that at what point he is going to drop the body. So all these are various experiences of his. Now we come to that part where in that era, two very prominent organizations, especially in Bengal, were this Brahma Samaj and Arya Samaj. So Brahma Samaj, Raja Ram Mohan Roy founded it 1774 to 1833, and Raja Ram Mohan Roy, though he was born in an Orthodox Brahmin family, he had a lot of sympathy for Islam and for Christianity, and he had even gone to Tibet in search of Buddhist mysteries. So what he had done was when he formed this Brahma Samaj in 1828, he formed Brahma Samaj. The objective was that this is dedicated to the worship and the adoration of the eternal, unsearchable, immutable being who is the author and preserver of the universe. So Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was the founder, and he did not want some of the Vedic texts and the Vedic principles or even murtis, etc., to come into the Brahma Samaj. Then we find the Samaj was actually organized properly and strengthened by Devendranath Tagore, who is father of Rabindranath Tagore. So the Devendranath Tagore, he was also called as Maharshi by many people there, because he drew a lot of his inspiration from the Upanishads, and his base was the Veda. And so he also did not want the Murti Puja to happen, because Upanishads don't speak about Murti Puja, but the Puranas and many other scriptures they speak. And it's not that Upanishads don't give methods of upasana, they give methods of meditation to make the mind single pointed, but they don't use a specific form. But Devendranath Tagore was not very happy with the infiltration of this Christian ideas into the Samaj because of Ram Mohan Roy. So he ensured that the Vedas and the Upanishads, they become the foundation of this Samaj. And so he started bringing this knowledge properly into the Samaj. The third leader who took this movement forward was called Keshav Chandra Sen. Now all the three, they stuck to the one principle that the Lord is formless and one should not worship the form at all, and that is idolatry and it is primitive and one should not engage in that. That is the thinking of the three of them. Why I'm saying this is, these are two apparently opposite thought processes. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa advocating personal form of the Lord, worshipping, experiencing many of those aspects, and Brahma Samaj is the exact opposite. So Keshav Chandra Sen also used to finally come to meet Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and they both had like this very opposite personalities. But yet they were very good friends, and Keshav Chandra Sen did learn many things from Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And later on, we also find that Vivekananda ji also earlier was influenced a lot by Brahma Samaj. So now that portion of his life starts where the disciples start coming to the master. Because as I said, he knew that there are some disciples who are to come, and they would start, Ramakrishna would wait, just like a devotee yearns for God. Ramakrishna was yearning for his disciples to come. When will they come? Now we may find this little puzzling, but it is also a fact that somebody who has realized the absolute truth, for them the body is a limitation. And they have anyway reason about body identification. They don't think that this body is they are this body. So we find that Ramakrishna lived only for 50 years. 1836 he was born, 1886 he dropped the body. Before he drops the body, there's a lot of work to be done. And already we saw that quite a lot of his time has passed in his initial years of all the sadhanas and many of his experiences. So it is said that he would go up on this terrace and he would look, where are my disciples? When are they going to come? And he would cry at the, shout at the top of his voice, cry sometimes, and he would say, "Come, my children, where are you? I cannot bear to live without you." And it is said here, a mother may not have longed so intensely for her child, a lover may not have longed that much intensely for a beloved, and a friend may not have longed that much with that intensity for their companion. But Ramakrishna's intensity was all these emotions put together and much more. And so he says that slowly the devotees started coming. Now see, it is 1879 and 1886 Ramakrishna has to pass away. So actually only 6 years time the devotees had with him, and in that also not all of them had 6 years with him. Like Vivekananda meets him somewhere around 1883, and 1886 Ramakrishna is gone. So the time that he has was very less, and that's why this yearning was a lot. Ki, where are these disciples? And he would even tell the mother, ki, why are you not sending them? So slowly many disciples started coming, because few things started, people started understanding about Ramakrishna, and even Brahma Samaj started writing about Ramakrishna and his experiences. And at that time, Brahma Samaj was considered to be the for the intellectuals, elites, logical people, that is the authority. So in Brahma Samaj writings, when this started coming, the experiences of Ramakrishna and the conversation that Ramakrishna and Keshav Chandra Sen had, many people would get influenced. And so we find that devotees of all different sects of Hindu culture, so they started coming. So the Brahmanas, the Vaishnavas, the Shaktas, many of them, even Brahma Samaj people used to come. Young people, Maharajas, beggars, journalists, artists, pandits, devotees, many people, they used to come. Women used to come. Some prostitutes also used to come. Office holders, vagabonds, philanthropists, so many of them. So these are devotees who come in at various times to learn from him, and according to each one's temperament, the master would guide them. So these are not the disciples yet. Disciples are, they come still later, who take this movement forward in a very committed way. They are the disciples. So it starts with the devotees. So these devotees, they start coming, and 20 out of 24 hours, the master used to meet them, talk to them, give them this knowledge, ignite the spiritual fire in their mind. So though Ramakrishna did not travel across the world, like same way like Ramana Maharshi, he didn't travel across the world. He was in one place in Tiruvannamalai. Same way Ramakrishna was here in Dakshineshwar. But people started coming to him. Like our Gurudev Swami Chinmanand used to always give the example that when the flower opens, it blossoms properly, the fragrance spreads, the bees will come automatically. We don't have to, the flower doesn't have to advertise that now, please, the bees should come here and let the pollination happen, etc. Nothing. The bees will themselves come. The fragrance has to just spread. So Ramakrishna was like that. And he would teach each one understanding their temperament, because he also has that vast experience of various aspects of spirituality, various sadhanas that he has done. Though he would do all this, he was not bothered by that ego that comes with knowledge, or the ego that comes that I am a teacher, then these are my disciples or these are my devotees. That never touched him. And he would actually say that three ideas, that he is a guru, a father, and a master, pricked his flesh like thorns. Meaning he never entertained these thoughts that I am a father of so many of these people, or I am a guru of so many of these people, or I am somebody who is teaching them, initiating them. None of that ego was there. An example given here is that he is like an expert gardener who prepares the soil, who removes the weeds, etc., who has planted the seed inside, who waters it, who removes the weeds, who ensures that there's good sunlight, and who knows that what is in the seed is going to manifest. The potential is all in the seed. Same way, the a real teacher would always have that attitude. If somebody says, I am a teacher and I have initiated so many and I have inspired so many, then there is still that ego which is there. And as we saw earlier, for the realized master, so there is no difference between teacher and disciple. All are appearances of Brahman only. So anyway, they will not have that ego that I am a teacher, I am superior, you are disciple, you are lesser, you still have to get that experience. That is not there in them. So Ramakrishna had that bhav of utter humility, and he would always say that there is only one guru, and that is the divine Lord. The Lord alone can be the real guru, and that is a fact. Especially in spiritual path, there is no guru except Bhagwan. So with that attitude, he would teach, he would share the love of the Lord, he would ignite the minds of people. And so many of these disciples would learn just by his presence. Though the master would speak words, guide them, tell them stories, he would sing bhajans, go into trance, etc. But his presence is very powerful. And so many people, they benefited from the very divine presence of such a master. This has a lot of impact in sadhana. Because in the presence of the master, our mind can experience those things which, by the power of the master's sadhana, our mind gets uplifted. Which is why the guru is required on the spiritual path. It is not about the information in the books. The presence of the guru uplifts the student just by the presence. The mind gets tremendous strength to walk the spiritual path, to lift itself higher and higher, and ultimately experience the divine. What one may do with many years of sadhana and one may still not attain, in few moments in the presence of the master that will happen. So that's why his presence itself is a very great blessing, and the words are just means. And also that he was very approachable. He did not have this, you're not on some high pedestal that I am the guru of all of you and you should respect me. Nothing. He would be like a child, he would be like a friend to the disciples who are there, the devotees, whoever is there. So it is said here that the disciples remarked that while they were with him, they would regard him as a comrade, but afterwards they would tremble to think of their frivolities in the presence of such a great person. How did we treat him? Because, he's so familiar. There's no barrier. He doesn't keep any barrier, no distance, nothing. Like how we find in the Gita, when Bhagwan shows the Vishwarup to Arjun, suddenly Arjun realizes, oh my God, the Lord of the universe, we have grown up together, and what all I have done, mischief I have done with him, I have called him names. So in the Gita it comes, Arjun asks for forgiveness from the Lord. He says, oh Lord, please forgive me. I called you, hey Krishna, hey Yadava, hey Sakheti. I didn't know. Ajanata Mahimanam Tavedam. I didn't know your glory and your grandeur. I just called you by name, hey Krishna, come here. So he says, please, you forgive me like a father forgives the son. Piteva Putra, Sakheva Sakhyu, like a friend would forgive another friend. A lover would forgive a beloved. Please, you forgive me. So some disciples who behaved in a casual way, later on would recollect all this, that how the master was so approachable, so genuine, mixing with everybody, though he is a very exalted being. These are some very powerful learnings from his life. And these are the types of people because of whom our culture is still surviving, alive, and spiritually it is thriving. because of such luminaries who come from time to time in this country. So now his disciples are of two categories. One are the household disciples, another are those who will take up the path of renunciation. And both men, women were there in both. There was no barrier of any gender, caste, creed, community. All types of people would be there. These are other things also to understand, that many people, when they speak about caste system, etc., there are great people who have fought against the caste system also. Because the caste system is by itself as a system is not a problem, but the human being have exploited that system. So all these social reformers also, like Dayanand Swamiji, Swami Dayananda Varya Samaj, he has also worked a lot to remove these misunderstandings. Many saints, so even Kabir Das ji or Mirabai or Tulsidas ji, here Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, like that in different centuries, different sages, seekers, sages and masters uh, have played a big role in reforming the society of all the degenerated evils, the evils that have come because of the degeneration of the culture. They have played a very important role to bring back the society to the ideas of love, peace, equality, harmony, etc. So now for the household devotees, he would give them the teachings appropriately, and he would tell them that do your duties dedicated to the divine, but at the same time take some time off exclusively and do puja, japa and meditation. So he would always tell the householders that one day in a month minimum, go away from all relationships and family and duties, etc., and pursue an exclusive sadhana for the Lord alone. So for householders, he would tell like that, and he would give an example, and he would tell them, seek the company of sadhus. And his example would be that it is very easy to fight an enemy from within a fort rather than being in an open field. So household life is like a fort. There is a lot of safety, security, physically also, emotionally also, financially also. But the life of a sannyasi is like being out in the open. Because sannyasis don't have a home, they don't have bank accounts, they live completely dependent on Bhagwan. So it is much more tougher life actually. So here to the householders, he would give this example that you already have some of these. Then the mind should actually engage more in the Lord. Think about it. Suppose we don't have food, we don't have enough clothes, we don't have place to stay. How will the mind think of Bhagwan? The mind will first go to the basic things first. Where are all these? And a sannyasi renounces all these and is completely out, dependent on Bhagwan fully. So not everyone can take up that path. So he would compassionately guide the householders in a certain way, and to the sannyasis, he would guide them in certain way. So one very famous example of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa for the householders is, he would say that with one hand you do your duties in the world, and with another hand you hold on to the Lord. And when you finish your duties in the day, with both the hands you hold on to the Lord and pray to the Lord that, oh Lord, please at the right time ensure that my duties come to an end and I can exclusively devote my life to your service. And that bhav with which you pray, the intensity with which you pray matters a lot, and at some point it will come true that you will exclusively be able to dedicate life to the Supreme. In our ashram vyavastha also, that is the point. Grahastha life is only for 25 years. Vanaprastha is another 25, and finally it is only sannyas, which is exclusive dedication to seeking God alone. So Grahastha is one stage of life. While being in that stage, one should do the duties, purify the mind, get enough vairagya, develop bhakti. That's the purpose of grahastha life actually. We may say that there are certain duties which we have to fulfill, which is a part of grahastha life. So family is there, children are there, they have to be brought up, they have to get married, they have to be settled well. So those are one aspect of grahastha life. But in and through this process, what is it that I have to cultivate spiritually? Selflessness, sacrifice, giving up likes and dislikes, developing devotion for the Lord, seeing the limitation of power, pleasure, prestige, popularity, and seeking purity of mind. These things are the deeper aspects of a grahastha life. And that is how grahastha life prepares a person for exclusive, full commitment towards seeking the Supreme. So he would teach the disciples according to this. For the sannyasi disciples, he would tell them strict rules of how a sannyasi should live in absolute self-control, not entertain the thought of lust and greed in the mind. Because till that is there, the body consciousness will remain. One has to drop greed, lust, anger, live in complete self-control, brahmacharya, conserve the vital energy of the body. Because when that energy is conserved, then the Sushumna Nadi can get activated from the standpoint of yoga, from standpoint of Jnanamarg, etc. The mind becomes ready for contemplation on the truth. From bhakti standpoint, the complete surrender to the Lord can happen only when there is complete self-control. So self-control, conserving the energy of the body, prana, mind is most important in sannyas. And living a life of seva, of sadhana is a aspect. So for sannyasis, these three are very important. Sanyam, swadhyay, sadhana, and seva. So 4 aspects. That one has to continuously live. Now, specific, there are many disciples who come, but I will take only 2 of them. So one disciple is called Ramchandra Dutt. Now this Ramchandra Dutt, he is a medical practitioner and a chemist, and he was very skeptical about God and religion, and he didn't enjoy, his mind was not at peace, and he wanted a tangible proof that God exists. So he went to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he had heard about him, etc. So he went. And in fact, this Ramchandra Datta was a part of Brahma Samaj. And he did not believe in the existence of form, etc. And he wanted proof for God. So to him, Ramakrishna said, that God really exists and it is a matter of experiencing it. So just like the stars you can't see in the daytime, but they exist. In the same way, and just like this buttermilk has the butter in it. Sorry, the milk has the butter in it, but you have to put the whole milk into a process, make the curd out of it, churn it, etc. Then the butter will come out. Same way, the whole world is pervaded by the divine, including oneself, one's own personality also, but is unmanifest right now. So if you do the process of sadhana, you can experience it by yourself also. And so in different stages, through different satsangs and sadhanas, etc., Ramakrishna was able to awaken the light of illumination in Ramchandra Dutt. And Ramchandra Dutt became one of his foremost disciples. And it is Ramchandra Dutt who actually introduced Narendranath to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So Narendranath is, because he was a relative of Ramchandra Dutt, and through him he came to Narendranath finally became Vivekanandi, but he was brought to Ramakrishna by Ramchandra Dutt. So that is what it is. That is how it is that the disciples started coming. So there are many such disciples: Surendra, Kedar, Harish, Balram Bose, Mahendranath. He's called M. Mahendranath is the one who wrote the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, a great devotee of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, a very pure mind and an illumined soul. He saw once Ramakrishna Paramahamsa folding a shawl with his full attention. Ramakrishna, of course, illumined master. So he was just folding a shawl. Ramakrishna was folding a shawl. Looking at Ramakrishna Paramahamsa folding the shawl, Mahendranath Dutt went into Samadhi. With such grace, Ramakrishna was folding that shawl with his full mind there, complete absorption. Mahendranath went into Samadhi. So Mahendranath, he wrote, and interesting thing is, many of the people are from Brahma Samaj. Mahendranath was also from Brahma Samaj. So a lot of the people who were not believing in God, who were not believing in form, how Ramakrishna's personal experience has transformed the lives of such people, which also shows that intellectually I may know many things and I may believe in certain aspects, in abstract aspects of God being formless and all those things. But the transformation that has to come finally needs the involvement of the heart, and involvement of heart means bhakti, and to a large extent form will come into play. So many of these disciples you will find, they belong to, so some of the disciples are Girish Ghosh, Purna, Pratap Hazra, like that many came. Now some of them, so these are examples of the householder devotees. Then who are the devotees who became monks, who took sannyas finally? So some of these monastic disciples are, the foremost amongst them is Narendranath Dutt, who is Swami Vivekananda. But then the others, Rakhal, Chandra Ghosh, who became Swami Brahmanandaji, again another great monk, and many beautiful books also Brahmanandaji has written. Gopal Chandra Ghosh, who became Advaitananda, then Baburam Ghosh, Premananda, Taraknath Ghosha, like that there is a list of many of these great sannyasis. About 17 of them. So next session, we will be able to conclude this great master's life, where we will see his brief interaction with Swami Vivekananda, how he transformed Narendranath into Swami Vivekananda, and then what happens further, and how then finally he took Samadhi. So for today, we will stop here. Anything in today's session you want to ask or share, you are welcome.
Swamiji, I was reading the story about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the historical basis.
Okay.
And what he was saying about idols was like the Christian theory of not having idols. So he's a little bit of a peculiar guy. He was, quite influenced by the British.
Yeah.
Although his ideas of Sati were very important. And he actually said, look at the Upanishads and see what they're saying. But he was a little bit mixed up gentleman on idol worship and what it meant.
Yeah.
So do they still have that, or has it changed? Because you still see Brahma Samaj people, no?
I am not very sure of what their present state is right now, because I haven't interacted much with any of the Brahma Samaj people. So I can't comment on that actually. But from what I understood, from what I've studied about Brahma Samaj of that time, Devendranath Thakur and Keshav Chandra Sen, they brought back the Vedic principles into the Brahma Samaj, and they did not want this. What you said was right. Ram Mohan Roy was quite a bit of a mixture, and he was not very clear. He just took certain things from different places, and he had started his Brahma Samaj, condemning some of the practices in Hindu culture also. But even so, after him itself, Brahma Samaj had started bringing in the Vedic principles, but they still believed in only the formless. The influence of others like Buddhism, Christianity and Islam, which was there on Brahma Samaj, that went away. So that much is what I know about Brahma Samaj.
Okay. Because they still exist, so I'm just wondering what their theory is now.
Yeah. Actually, it's a good, interesting thing to know first. Maybe I'll find out and hopefully I can tell you something next time.
It's not the same as the Brahma Kumaris, right?
No.
Or that's different?
Okay. Brahma Kumaris are different. That is Prajapita Brahma Kumari. So they believe that Prajapita is one and everybody else is a Brahma Kumari.
Okay. And the Arya Samaj in a similar way also doesn't have idols.
Yes.
Correct?
But Arya Samaj is completely rooted in the Vedic knowledge and they believe in the worship of the Lord through the fire. So they will do the ritual. So what they believe is the Sagun Nirakar Roop. So Bhagwan has qualities, but Bhagwan has no form. So even they will do Gayatri Havan, but they will not believe in the form of Mother Gayatri or Surya Dev. They will say that we are worshipping the absolute truth who is formless through this fire, through the Agni.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all very confusing.
Yeah. These are different. In Hindu culture, we have the three levels. That is why one is the level of the Dvaita, where the Lord has form as well as qualities, Sagun and Sakar. Then the next level is Sagun and Nirakar. So there is no form, but only qualities. And then the third is the highest one, which is Nirgun Nirakar. So they are actually meant for different temperaments of people. Some people need form, some people don't need form, some people are ready for the absolute. So it is meant for that. It's like you graduate from one to the other.
Okay. Any other questions? And we can.
All right. So everyone have a great year end.
Yeah.
Wish you a happy new
Merry
year.
Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.
प्रणाम गुरु जी
Hariom.
नए साल के लिए मुबारक हो
Thank you.
हरिओम
Hariom. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabri. Happy